Hello, everyone. I'm Nada of the Disruption Network Lab, and thanks for tuning in to our 24th Disruptive Friday episode, Digital Future. The Disruptive Friday is our online conversation series that started back in April 2020 as a platform to connect during our inability to physically meet as a team and with our community that has been going on for almost a year now. I'm particularly happy to host this episode as it's our last episode in the season, but it's also in collaboration with our dear partners at the Super Lab. That has also been organizing and recently launched the new fellowship program, which in short, Julia Kluber here, the co-founder and managing director of Super Lab, will tell us more about. Today, we are hosting some of the fellows taking part at the fellowship, the new, a joint initiative between the Super Lab and the Ethics of Algorithms project. As usual, we have our chat on our website. If you're watching us on YouTube or Facebook, it's disruptionlab.org/Fridays, where you can ask questions and interact with our guests through it. And at the end of our conversation, I'll be reading the questions as they come. As for today's episode, Digital Futures, we will use this chance to reflect together on the process of on the process of creating a space to explore our multitude identities and how we can imagine digital futures through plurality of different stories. In the time, especially last year, where our digital and real realities has been interchangeable, we are all the time connected, which brings us to the question of how can we come together to build a culture of solidarity where we innovate, build, and resist and reclaim spaces that amplify issues of underrepresentation, discrimination, inequality, and social justice. And specifically today, we'll focus on that discourse from a project focusing on immigrants, marginalized genders, and minority. So today with our guests, we're gonna ask some questions about what are the values of creating such a space for sharing and experimentation, where intersectionality is being tackled not as just a term, but also as a collective and participatory action. With these questions and more, the fellowship had started, and its fellows are more concerned with the process on how to design such a space. Unfortunately, we have announced that Andrew Mallinson will be joining us from the Feminist Internet with the project SIB, Queering Voice AI. But I highly recommend that you check their projects. So the link that we will provide on the chat now. And SIB is a voice interface designed by and for trans people, which connects user to media created by the trans community. So maybe in the future we'll be able to have Andrew with us, but it was one of the projects that was supposed to be here today. So I really highly recommend you go check their website and the documentation of the prototype they have been working on. I'm not going to take longer with this introduction because we're supposed to have more of a conversation, but I would like to hand over to our first guest, Imogen Malpas from the Dark Matters database, followed by Filipa Maceira and Irem Kurt of the Oaza Collective, to introduce themselves and tell us about the projects they have been working on during the fellowship so far. So, Imogen, I pass over to you.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me. So I guess I'll explain my project and then talk a little bit about the motivations behind it. So my project for the fellowship is a database which helps people of marginalized genders and ethnicities self-advocate for their own health outcomes, and which also helps clinicians and people working in the healthcare space to have more insight into the inequity that is actually going quite unnoticed in many places by clinicians, especially clinicians who are men or clinicians who aren't of colour, which still exists in the healthcare system. So, as you know, many people will be aware, there are very unequal lines of diagnosis in the Western healthcare system. in the UK, for example, Black people are 4 times more likely to present with advanced stage cancer of certain cancers, are more likely to be diagnosed with conditions like schizophrenia, which necessitate very severe treatment, and essentially have more mortality in so many areas of health across the board, particularly Black women. Black maternal mortality is very high, and there's countless cases, which I won't go into in depth, but there's also higher mortality for people of minority ethnic groups, and also lots of stigma still being perpetuated within some of those communities, and also by clinicians who don't belong to those communities but do make assumptions about those communities. And then when it comes to marginalized genders, there's also a huge amount of inequity. So women are more likely to be underdiagnosed with certain conditions, overdiagnosed with others. Women are far more likely to be disbelieved when they approach clinicians or healthcare workers about their symptoms. And then people who are non-binary or trans have even more, in many cases, even more difficulties to deal with, because actually there's lots of conditions which are more common in people of trans identity, which isn't always known about, and so can be misdiagnosed from a clinical perspective. So there's lots and lots of these kind of pitfalls which exist specifically for people from these marginalized backgrounds. And so my project aims to shine a light on these. So what I'm doing is I'm putting together a database which allows people to submit their experiences and their conditions and their symptoms, and categorize them by their eventual outcome. So as an example, say that I, as a woman, was suffering from a specific symptom of heart disease, and I had trouble getting that symptom recognized by my clinician or by my doctor. I could then submit that symptom into the database, and other women then who were also struggling with, wondering, is this condition a symptom of heart disease or not? Because my doctors may be telling me that I'm fine. They can look on the database and they can see, actually other women have come forward and have said this is an issue for them, and they ended up being diagnosed with this thing. So maybe I can then advocate for my condition and for my kind of belief in what my body's telling me from a medical perspective. And the other aspect, as I've mentioned, is that clinicians can also use this. So for a lot of clinicians, the training that they receive is still shockingly based on white men. So the first, for example, in the UK, the first clinical handbook to come out, which actually showed conditions on darker skin, only came out, but was actually designed by a medical student who hadn't even graduated yet, and he saw the need for this and he created this in the last few years. So it's very much something that hasn't really been addressed on a widespread level even today. And even though that textbook is a fantastic project, there's still lots of areas that it's not able to cover. For example, mental health symptoms, which, as I've said, are massively stigmatized and overdiagnosed in communities of color. So I think there's a long way to go. And I'm not by any means saying that my project is going to solve all these issues. I think it needs a lot of people working together, and there's already many people working in this area. And I'm just hoping that I can join a little part of that and kind of expand that work into something that's tangible and that helps people advocate for their own health. And I guess a couple questions that I'm thinking about at the moment and that might be interesting to discuss are, first of all, the role of a database in everything, I guess, but particularly in a technological context. So I think a lot of us, myself included, think of databases as passive. We kind of access them if we need information, and they sit there when we don't use them, and they exist very much as a source that we can dip in and out of to gain knowledge when we need. And I honestly, if I'm being honest, I kind of approached this project with that in mind. And I think what's been amazing about this fellowship and talking to other people on it, particularly Carla and Adrian, who run Internet Teapot, who are also on this fellowship, they let me know about this great book called Database Aesthetics, which I really recommend. It's a collection of essays. And that really made me see that a database is actually something that's very active. There's a lot of kind of embedded bias and embedded knowledge, even in the structure of the software that we use to design this kind of a thing. And it's very important that we interrogate that, and especially that I interrogate that as someone who is a white person, someone who, yes, has experienced a small minority of these medical discrimination events, but by no means the majority of them. So I'm really trying to make sure that I'm analysing my work from the perspective of the database being something that is active, something that holds power, something that can advocate actively for us and for people that most need it. And then I guess another question that I'm thinking about is the idea of tech in general. And I think a lot of people, again, myself included, have often felt that they don't necessarily belong in the space of tech creativity or in the area where those two things combine. My background isn't in tech, and so I've always felt, who am I to be creating this project which revolves around software? And I'd be really interested to hear, what other people think on that. I think for me, it's been something of a revelation to understand that, of course, this project is, as I say, only a tiny part of the eventual, hopefully, a solution to these issues. But I think that what's very important is, A, the support of the fellowship, and also the fact that even though I don't come from a coding background, there's so many platforms that I've been able to use and so much help that I've been able to get from a network. So just really, the importance of having a network around you has been really clear to me. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Imogen, very much. And I think I'll go back to investigating more some of the issues you have already mentioned. But now I'm going to go to Anna. I think she will give us the presentation. And we come back to Julia after that.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having us on. And Imogen, you raised some really interesting questions that I hope we get to. And now I would like to introduce you to OZA Collective. So this is a fluid collective of migrant, BIPOC, and diaspora illustrators and social changers. Right now we are building with the an intersectional digital platform to bring awareness to inequity and discrimination by creating new forms of collaboration and creative exchange. Our communities are constantly framed around prejudice and biased narratives, and we can control them, but they still really affect our lives. So what we are doing is reaching out to fellow illustrators and creatives that are part of these communities to create together a place where we can share our narratives, reclaiming them back, and on our own terms. So we also work with organizations that focus on making the world a more equal and safe space for everyone. And our goal is to empower and showcase amazing illustrators and become an online and offline kind of community center for everyone who is inclusive and is really passionate about reshaping society. It's a place for coming together, collaborating, and most importantly, empowering one another. We started by organizing in-person events, but then when the pandemic hit, we decided to go online and really use the possibilities of the internet to our advantage. And we were able to connect with even more people and host digital events where our creatives from the collective were able to still share their stories and really support and get to know each other. And we were able to find even more artists than we would have otherwise. And what we find is that technology allows us to do more with less resources. And something that we realized that was really important as well was that it turns OZA into a much more accessible organism. And in this way, we can invest more of our time researching these social issues that are more often than not very complex. And we can find better ways to debate and collaborate as artists and social changers. So our question that we make ourselves is always, what is our responsibility as image makers in this world? Like, what can we do better? And we started this project because we weren't seeing many illustrators that were not white being exhibited, and diversity was really missing from these rooms. And we wanted to make events with POC artists from different backgrounds, different perspectives, since we know they exist and they are creating great work, but for some reason weren't as visible. And at the moment, we have several events and projects on the works. And you can follow us to participate, but also to get involved and be part of this fluid collective. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, very much. That was, and also you have such very, very cool collection of illustration that I advise everyone to go check your Instagram. It's the most active platform for you, and you also have a shop that has like really cool stuff that I explored last week. So I'm really excited to have you on board and with this nice, amazing illustrations. And now I'm happy to, I know Julian didn't want to speak too much for today to give more space to with the fellows, but I'm also happy to hear from you to give us an overview on also the other projects of the fellowship, because there are many, many more super interesting projects, and also the methodology that you use at the fellowship and the diversity of the project, how it has been selected, and also from like an organizer perspective to the overall fellowship program altogether. So Julia. You are muted. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for having me. As Nada said, I'm here to give you a brief overview on the program. So it's called The New New. The website is thenewnew.space. And we started it, actually, the application process last year together with Bertelsmann Foundation, Allianz Foundation, and the Goethe Institute. They are funding the project. And the goal really is to flesh out, to support projects and teams across Europe that are working on just, on inclusive digital futures and showing what these futures could look like. Because oftentimes when we talk about technology, we get lost and stuck in like super dystopian narratives or like very utopian ones that are super unrealistic. And when we look at digital civil society organizations, then we're oftentimes talking about regulations. We're trying to work against narratives that are presented by the big tech companies, but there's usually very little space and time and resources to think ahead, to develop visions, new tools on how the digital tools can be used for society, can be used for including people that are not included yet, or that are not connected yet, or that just don't have the spaces online where they can exchange and share. So developing narratives and stories and supporting projects across Europe that do so. And to be honest, we were overwhelmed by applications, so we didn't expect to get almost 300 applications in the beginning of the year, and we initially planned to only support 6 fellows, but were able, due to the high demand, to then expand it to 12 projects and those that we're supporting with financial support, but also with coachings and trainings. So each team can decide what coachings, what training opportunities they would like to take on, because this is also something that is oftentimes under-resourced. We're like working very much in the day-to-day and have very little time to get coaching and training on specific topics and dive a little deeper. And another big aspect is, of course, also connecting the different projects and fellows across Europe so that they can learn from one another. We're having regular meetups. In the last one, we discussed, or we started to discuss what safer spaces, what brave spaces online could look like. We're going to dive a little deeper into that in our next session. So thematic exchange, but also showcasing what is out there, what is being developed, and making us all hopeful for the digital future, or the future that is ahead of all of us. And also discussing that there's not only one future, but there's many different futures that people are imagining. And just to maybe give you a brief overview on some other projects, there's 12 projects in the program, very diverse projects. One of them is Hermann Radio. We're supporting ABIA and her team. And Hermann Radio is an Arabic feminist participatory radio that launched last year. So the team used to run in-person events, and then due to Corona, that wasn't possible anymore. So they decided to start a grassroots radio channel. And without a lot of ads, they managed to, without a lot of promotion, they managed to have a listener community of over 60,000 people from various countries. They're talking about feminist topics. I really urge you to check out their streams. One session is called Viva la Vulva, or there's also other ones that talk about Saudi Arabia. And let me just quickly look it up because I wrote down the topics of the shows. The Great Saudi Podcast is another one. Hammam Radio is a space where women, trans, and queer folks exchange on feminist topics, not only in the Arabic-speaking countries, there's also shows on English and beyond. So very cool project. Another one is Chain Italia. Chain is an organization that is building tech resilience against domestic abuse in Italy and beyond. So it's an organization that is in the UK, in Pakistan, that has over 400 volunteers and has a reach of 380,000 people. I talked to Hera last year, the person that founded it, and what they're developing are tools for defense, resilience, and positive connection. And they develop guides. How to build your own domestic violence case with a lawyer is one of the guides that they brought out. Or they also have a trauma support program called Bloom, where people can exchange and can get advice. And it's basically a virtual support group for people with traumas and who want to work on that. What I find really interesting about their project is that they really tailor the design and the tools they work on around the needs of vulnerable groups. And I can highly recommend the Chain's blog posts about the design practice and about what they've learned in the field. Then maybe two more projects. There's so many of them. Sorry that I can't like them, and I would prefer the fellows and the project to talk about them. But there's a project called Multivocal from Denmark that works towards an alternative future for digital voice assistants. As many of us know, these assistants are often binary and very limited when it comes to age and geographic region. So they are developing synthetic voices that can present with more than one age, gender, and geographic origin. I want to leave it there. There's so many more cool projects on the new.space. And on the 15th of June, we're going to host a Speculative Futures workshop with Joanna Varon. And we have 5 spots still available that people from outside the group can join. So if people listening to us are interested in joining that, please drop us an email at hello@super.net, and you're warmly invited to join us for this workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, so much. And thanks to the fellows. That was really interesting moment of sharing among what is happening. We really wanted to kind of like host everyone that got the fellowship, but for 1 hour we can do very little. And I also had the honor to join one of the Hammam Radio's episode before with Abir. It was really cool. Happy to see them on the list, and as a friend and supporter to see how the project expanded. Really happy with that. And yes, of course, I'd highly recommend to check all the projects Julia had mentioned and more. And the interesting thing about it that some of the projects are still really in the making, and that's what makes it really exciting to also hear from the 3 amazing fellows we have today on the development more, and as we are also interested in the process as much as the fellowship is. So I have heard also when we're preparing for the session that I remember one of you saying that you would have imagined the fellowship. It's not only just, it's a lot more than a financial support to your own projects. It's also like sharing an alternative learning space among with other fellows. And so I would just ask a very general question to all of you. What is the importance of taking place in such an alternative learning space to your own project? Or in other words, what are the possibilities and also the challenges that might have appeared while working in such a space on your projects and have opened up different angles of how you see and work, connect and inspire by other projects in the making of yours? So if Irem maybe wants to start, since we haven't had you talking much yet.
Yeah, sure. I think it's interesting because there are some projects who are in the similar mindset, but also projects who are doing something differently, not the same or have a different outlook. And it's interesting to learn from them and to see how we can into our project and try to bring it home somehow. Yesterday, for example, there was a really nice workshop about algorithms, and which was really interesting to see how people from another part of the world are tackling issues that might be similar but also different, and getting in touch and talking about topics that are not as close to the projects we're doing right now, but still somehow similar but different. So I think for me it's really interesting to be in this pool of people and to be able to network and learn together. Yes. But
Sorry, I was muted. Okay, now it has to happen once to every person. So I was also interested in seeing that you have started the collective as more of an offline community of illustrators, and now you're kind of shifting to the more like of a community building interest into a more online. And I have known mainly from Anna, maybe for Irem, you're a UX designer, but also as Imogen mentioned, I was very interested in the idea that you're working in a digital sphere without not necessarily being a coder or a programmer. And also from the element of the topic that you're working about, that you're working to amplify artists coming from specific backgrounds that away from like the mainstream narrative. How was it building these online community for you, and what was the experience, and what kind of gap were you trying to fulfill, starting with the collective but also taking it a step further into being an online platform? Or
okay, it was first on offline. That's right. We were looking for peers who also have a migrational background or who identify as POC or people of the diaspora. It wasn't that easy because we are in Berlin and you find people in Berlin, but you can't reach out to people from everywhere or bring them to Berlin because not everyone has the resources or the time. And with the internet, going online actually helped us to connect more easily and bring events to the digital space where we were able also to meet people from other countries who identify with the same terms and even discuss how these kind of projects could be tackled or handled. So at the beginning, it was kind of strange because usually it's nicer to talk to people face to face, but with time we realized that it brings advantage. And as a UX designer, I know how to build website. I'm not a coder, that's right, but I know I'm usually in my daily work um, working with. It's not that unfamiliar to me, but right now we don't have really like developers on our team, so we are looking. Actually, we have one girl who will join us, who's also identifying as POC, which is really nice. So now our main focus is what do we actually need or what do we want to present on that platform? And for that, we need the community to speak with us. And I think one issue we have right now is like, how do we reach out to the community? How can we bring them into a space to talk about issues? In the offline world, we would have a meeting, and now we are trying to see how will this happen in the online. Will it be over Zoom or Will we do it with my robots and so on? So I think these are main questions we have right now, like how can we translate what we would do in real life to the digital space to build up this platform together with people from our communities who are mainly people who are marginalized and but people who are proactive and want to bring change and not only stay in that marginalized group, because usually it's even hard for me sometimes to say I'm a migrant or I'm marginalized or I'm POC, because it brings me in a situation of I don't have the power, but with USA we do have the power, and we're switching the narrative by saying yes, we can do. We come together as a community, as people who wanna change the narrative. So yeah, I give it to Filipa. Maybe she wants to add something.
I just wanted to add that the technology part of it, that at first we didn't see, and we are so glad that we went on this route, because it completely opened the horizons for what our project could be and how many people we could approach, work with, and inspire somehow, and also like how I feel like the possibilities of what we could do really opened up in this digital sphere. And we had this event in the beginning of the year with a really nice association called Aqua. And we had people, because it was on the internet, we had people from all over the world really connecting about and relating to these issues and working together. And that was, I think that's the most inspiring part, that then with the new and then talking to all of the fellows and seeing how they are tackling these issues is just really inspiring and revigorating in a world that kind of looks has this dystopian narratives. I think it's it was very necessary, and it's really invigorating. Yeah.
Thanks, Anna. And I think, yeah, use the microphone, but I think good. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think also I would also invite Julia, if she has any more questions, to the fellows to jump into our conversation. But I have a question to Imogen that you actually covered briefly in your talk, and I was preparing to ask you this about the choice of the database as the medium to work with your own project. And I think you have highlighted also a very interesting aspect that maybe you can expand on a little bit, which is the choice of the medium of the database. And also you have, if you can expand more on the amount of invisible labor, or actually obvious labor in that case, of building together this database by asking people to anonymously submit their like diagnoses or stories, or just all of this to try to build the database to share an awareness on a very important topic that you decided to work on. But in a sense, it also leaves me to this big question that when we see big tech companies doing a database, like they already collect data on us, and they have all of these privilege to just easily create a database. But from the other hand, building the database from your aspect of the project with all of these like human labor into putting the database into it. So it's kind of make a question on the power structure of technology and tech companies, and how this manipulation has been happening with all the data they already have. So it's kind of, if you can reflect a little bit about that from your perspective of the project, and also the choice of the database as the medium to work with.
Yeah, great questions. So I guess if I start off with the first kind of question, which is why a database in the first place. Actually, this project started as a photography project. So my idea was basically to run kind of like an alternative public health project set of posters. So you know how you'd have, I don't know, check yourself for skin cancer kind of posters, and it would have a picture of a mole, for example. And invariably that would be on pale skin, and it would be a very kind of standardized idea of what the medical system thinks a mole or skin cancer looks like, which is of course true for some people, not for everyone. So that was kind of the idea that I first had, which was just to make a series of images to kind of question this idea of, is public health imaging actually public? Like, is it actually for the benefit of the majority or not really? And I think as I talked through this idea with other people and with people working in similar areas, I kind of realized that actually I wanted to work with a more fluid medium, because the thing with creating these kind of images is that they are a lot more static, and they are kind of this passive object or this passive concept that is exactly what I kind of wanted to avoid, and which is what I realized the database wasn't. And I think that then, going on to your second question, comes with, as you say, a lot of almost invisible embedded labor. So if I'm then deciding, okay, I'm going to create something that requires contributions and requires a lot more kind of input from others, and it's not just me researching, the available data on what are the most important conditions that are underrepresented in medical history and presenting them on posters. If I'm going to do something that's actually a lot more requiring of other people's effort and energy to come into it, I think that what I concluded was that would be also giving a much bigger reward to the people who were able to contribute. And by reward, I mean that kind of in opposition to the tech platforms that we see now, where a lot of them, are free because, as the saying goes, you're the product, right? And your attention is what they're buying and selling. This database, what it's aiming to be instead of that, is to be equally active and equally based on contribution, but much more about being able to empower a community and individuals within that community in a way that goes far beyond just one person's individual contribution. So the idea, hopefully, is that even if someone submits a symptom that they themselves have experienced, and, that's kind of their contribution in that specific moment, they will then have access. I mean, obviously anyone has access. You don't have to submit to have access, but they will then be part of this network, which in itself is a kind of form of self-advocacy. And as it grows, it becomes a method and like an active participant in this fight for health equity. And I think it's a very important point to make, that this is still labor requiring of people, and by no means am I kind of wanting to contribute, even if it's just a simple image or a few words. That is building the product that will then be used by others. And that's definitely something that I'm still working on, especially in terms of data privacy and anonymity and all of those. That's a very important thing, that I want to get right, and to make sure that that's absolutely watertight. But yeah, another question that I think is really important is this idea of like, who's it for? And the last thing that I want to do is create a product where the benefit goes elsewhere. Like, I want the benefit to return 100-fold to the people who have contributed to it. And so, for example, if I contribute to it, I want to then know that not only is my contribution going to hopefully help others in a similar situation to me, but I will also then be part of this network of individuals who together make up something bigger than themselves, in the sense that together they're contributing to something that's able to push forward this fight towards health equity. I don't know if that actually makes sense, and I'd be very interested to hear what people think, if that makes sense or not. But that's something that I'm actively working on and having conversations about. So it's definitely by no means a static thing, especially since I myself, as I said, I'm obviously not a person of color, and so I want to make sure that in all ways this database is, the priority is safeguarding and protecting those people of marginalized genders and ethnicities who contribute to it. It's not about me. That's the idea behind it.
Can I? Yeah, because Nada, you said I can also ask a question, so I'm wondering,
Sure.
maybe for USA Collective, because you have such an impressive Instagram channel with the illustrations. Can you tell us a little bit more, like, about the illustrations and what stories people are conveying and telling through the illustrations, and whether you see that there's gaps and potential for your community to still grow, but to maybe just to make people curious to check out the Instagram channel and other platforms and the illustrations. I was wondering if you want to give us a little bit of an insight, or yeah.
Yeah,
Of
I can
course.
talk about that. You wanna go? Okay.
You go.
Okay. We have different voices. We have people that identify as people of color or diaspora or migrant, because we came to the term that not everyone who has a migration background sees themselves as that, because it depends where your parents, like, did your parents migrated to Germany, for example, or as Filipa, for example, she migrated herself to Germany. So, but I was born here, so I wouldn't tell that I'm a migrant. So there are people from different kind of identifications and different stories, because if you are a migrant who grew up here, you have your own stories that differ from stories of people who came here in their 20s, for example. So some of our members, or like collective participants, they're talking more about how it is to have parents who are from other countries and who came to Germany. There was one artist, her name is Maya, she's also part of USA Collective. She moved here like a few years ago from her home country and is telling how it is to live in Germany and how different it is, and the eating culture, for example. And this is a comic series we're working with her together. And my topic I'm right now like researching a lot is about Gastarbeiter, guest workers, who came here like 30, 40 years ago to Germany, and try to film narratives about them, because that is really close to my heart. So there are different narratives we try to talk about, and we are always searching also for people who want to bring their stories, and like people from the Black community, we have people from the Asian community. So it's a mix of different voices, which is really important, because we don't want to have this issue of bubbles. That's a term we use a lot. Like, it's not a bubble for the Asian community, for the Black community, for people who identify as POC. It should be something where we come together in this kind of melting pot and just try to talk about our stories we want to share, and maybe also inspire each other and find ways to build images. Yeah. So it's quite interesting, because it's also an experiment, actually. If which yeah, I pass over to Filipa. Maybe she wants to add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it was important to us when we decide to open and have a room for diversity and people from different backgrounds, that they don't feel pressure to illustrate these specific issues. So we have this side that is like just exhibiting work and allowing them to talk about anything else that they would love to talk about, what is really dear. Because I feel like sometimes you get a person, just because belongs to some sort of group, they are an activist and they must talk about it. And we really wanted to say, no, you can, like, this is a space for you to shine however you feel like it. And then we also have this other part where we talk about these issues, and that's something that we are illustrating, since even though I am a migrant, I'm also, for various reasons, more privileged than other people from the collective. And so I think, or like we think, and together, that we could tackle these harder issues and illustrate them. And like whoever wants to illustrate them, there's not this demand for it. It's really, it's the idea is to be creatively free, because that's another way to achieve equality, to just So that is something that I wanted to add. And for example, Maya is also, she has a very comic side, because it's about the funny parts and the misunderstandings of culture when you get to a place where everything is different, but it kind of looks, we still eat, we still love, it's still the same, but it's different. And yeah, we really invite you to see her experiences are really interesting. But in a way, it's kind of supportive and empowering to see, oh, I also make that mistake. That's not so bad. In some cases, like, oh, that's not so bad. We are all in this together, making mistakes as we go. And then in others can be like a very deep way to feel like less alone. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I have one last thing to add, which is also interesting, is that we also work with people who are not illustrators. We have one person in our team who is a researcher more, and who brings his ideas and experience into this, where we connect and look for a narrative to find, or how can we visualize his researches and bring it to USA. And that's also really interesting, that we connect different kind of experiences. And so you don't have to be an illustrator to come and be part of this experience with us.
Thank you. That was really interesting, and I think you very much explained how the illustration works, because when you were talking, I had in my mind a couple of the illustrations that I saw on your page. So it's very relatable and yet very empowering, and also it's very interesting how you organize. And I'm very happy to see how you're taking the project further, and also as you have managed to create a safe space with a very diverse collective. How will this be online? And I would like to stay in touch to know how this developed on the online sphere, and also different experiences of how you define people when you work with people of color and diaspora. And I think Julia, wanna say something?
I'm also curious, Imogen. Are you what are the organizations around you that you're inspired by, or that you would like to work with? In the US, there's an organization called Data for Black Lives, founded by Yeshibet Milner, there's many organizations like that. So I'm just curious, who would you like to collaborate with, and who inspires you in the space that you're working in?
Oh my gosh, so many people. Honestly, I think, as I say, and as I think is quite clear, it's definitely something that's been going for a long time, and many people have been working on this for a very large amount of time, and have understood the fact that this is something that's really needed. And I think some of the work I'm really inspired by. So first of all, the textbook that I mentioned, that was developed by a medical student called Maloney McWende. He was at St George's. I'm not sure if I don't think he's graduated yet, but he developed this textbook, a few years ago, and it was recently published. It's called Mind the Gap, and now he's working on a project called Black and Brown Skin, which basically is an expansion of this work, looking at all the ways in which people with black and brown skin are underserved by the medical service, and basically very similar to my work, but a lot further ahead in terms of how can we make sure that clinicians are trained so that they recognize these signs appropriately. So something that he speaks a lot about in the media is, for example, blue lips. So during COVID, people were warned to watch out for, in other people, signs of deterioration and issues with breathing. And one of those things was looking for blue lips around the edges of the lip in particular. Now, of course, that is only appropriate for someone with pale skin. So if you have dark skin, and the darker that your skin tone is, the less likely it is that blueness will appear. And so that's one of those ways in which the health services are kind of quite blind to the fact that actually a large number of the people that they're giving advice to won't be able to apply that advice, and that advice will actually be counterintuitive, because you might think, well, there's no blueness there, they'll be fine. And it's one of the very, very many ways in which I think a lot of the medical system is almost unconscious of the fact that this bias exists. And a lot of clinicians that I know, junior doctors that I know, have said, I never really thought about it, but actually, yes, this is not something that we're taught about. So he's doing amazing work from the, as a medical student himself, from the ground up to kind of build this awareness. And then there's also a US-based organization called Health in Her Hue, and that's run by a woman called Ashley Wisdom, and she's doing amazing work, essentially looking at health outcomes, especially for Black women and women of colour, and the inequities there, and kind of understanding ways in which we can not only bring this to people's attention, but also to work, for example, with maternal mortality to improve outcomes. And similar work is being done by loads of organisations across the US and Europe. And the final one that I want to mention, which is, I guess, a little outside of this specific health-related work, but is still amazingly important, is the Algorithmic Justice League. So that is basically an organization which has done amazing work looking at how the algorithms that run so much of our tech are biased. And I think that's something that I've, as I say, have been keeping in mind when developing this database, in the sense that I obviously come with my own biases attached, and I don't want to perpetuate those in the designs that I'm creating. And so, yeah, the Algorithmic Justice League is doing incredible work looking at how, all kinds of tech, from facial recognition to software that you don't even see, that you and I wouldn't even use on a daily basis, is incredibly biased because of who's designing it. And so one of the things that I'm trying to do is involve as many people of colour and people of genders different to mine in my work, to make sure that that process is stripped of as much bias as possible.
Nice. I think we can make a whole episode on data bias, and we had a whole conference about it. It was called AI Traps. It was about discrimination in gender and race, and especially with databases, how are they can be subjective or objective, and it's a very long conversation that maybe we can also take it further to discuss. But I think it's if I would comment on that, it's just how ethical is the database and how unbiased is maybe something interest to investigate, or it just to be like upfront and transparent, or where this database is coming, how the data was collected, and also to be, because in a sense there will always be some sort of subjectivity and bias, but at the same time it's important to say how this was created in and this is very ethical to do, rather than just trying to be unbiased. And that would be like, it's a very interesting duality that, as I said, we can keep discussing, but I'm happy to also see that you're very aware of that aspect doing the database. So it's really interesting to see how it will develop, and speak about that, and you being aware of doing this, and how you will navigate these narratives. We have a question from the audience that I think is mainly to Anna and Irem, and it says, I find the definition of diaspora illustrator is very interesting. Could you expand a bit more and explain it through your own practice? I think we have covered this through the question that Julia asked, but if you'd like to specifically tackle the idea of diaspora illustrator, if you have a comment on that.
I
Should
can
I
go
go?
then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, you go. You want to go?
You
Okay.
can go.
I think the diaspora, it's a term we use for communities who were born and raised here, but who have a migrational background. And yeah, that's, I think, the explanation for that. And there are some people who, as I already mentioned, I wouldn't say I'm a migrant because I'm German, but I would say I'm from the diaspora because my parents are migrants. So it's a difference to someone who migrated here by themselves. I would say that's the difference, how we see it.
Thank you, Irem. Anna, would you like to add something?
That it's actually, I wanted to say that it's very interesting when we talk to some artists that maybe we thought they would see themselves as BIPOC, but they don't, because of their migration history and because of their part of the diaspora. So that's why we included all of this, because it's such a complex idea, because it really depends on your personal reality. Sometimes it's not so much something that you can see from the skin color and like your appearance. It's very based on your experience and cultural background. And so, yeah, that's why we added we have all the terms like migrant, BIPOC, and diaspora to better include everyone. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks. And there is another question. There is a question to Julia on when is the next call for the fellowship.
We're working on it right now, actually, and also thinking about how can we not only connect people who are working on inclusive and just futures, but also how can we reach out to decision makers, to policy makers? How can we better include them, and not only include them, but how can we better reach them with the concepts, the visions people are working on, so that they do not only stay in a bubble of people who already converted and preaching to one another, but to burst the bubble and to expand and reach people who are not thinking about many of the issues that we are thinking about and discussing in conversations like this. So for those who want to stay in touch and up to date on the next call and so on, there is a newsletter on the New New Space website. That's unfortunately the only, not a very satisfying answer, but the only answer I can give for now. But super excited to hear that people are curious and interested, and will via the newsletter also publish interviews and more insights into the projects and the discussions that we're having. That's definitely something that we're working on, not only in the group of fellows, but to make the content and the discussions available to a larger audience and to engage in discussions with a larger audience.
Great. I think we have kind of reaching an end to our conversation today, but I would just, if the fellows have comments to one another, or if any last thoughts you would like to share, otherwise I will kind of wrap up our conversation, but let me know if you have any last statement or comment to make.
I have one last statement. If you're interested to be part, just reach out and write us an email or a message on Instagram. We would be happy to connect.
That's great. And I think also for Imogen. Yeah. Go ahead, Julie.
No,
sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to, because for Imogen, I'm not sure if you also planning like something public to go for the database soon, or how can people also reach you if there is a page or that you would like to share, that would be cool to maybe tell people about, since it's in the process of making. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So I recently launched an open call for submissions and expressions of interest as well, and that's accessible via the Instagram, which is Spanner Labs. So SPANNER Labs LABS is just the Instagram page, and you can find that via the post there.
And I just wanted to say thanks, Elena and Nada and Disruption Lab, for hosting the Disruptive Fridays and being a great platform for these discussions. And what's the next topic that's up for you? Like, what's the next event?
Okay, I would come to that, but first, thank you all very much. It has been super interesting, even when we were preparing for that and hearing earlier from Julia about the fellowship and now speaking to you. It has been really interesting to see how this is developing, and I hope we stay in touch also for future collaboration, and to see also how the projects develop and how the new fellowship would be happening and taking place, and also to participate in the public programs. So that was a very happy note to end our season with the Disruptive Friday, and maybe we come back after the summer. And speaking of which, our next disruption activities is our next conference, which will be at Kunstquartier Bethanien in Berlin, and it will take hopefully a more of a physical aspect, but still going to be a hybrid format between online and offline participation, which will take place from the 1st to the 3rd of October in 2021. And it will be called Powers of Truth, which will deal with the discourse of art, technology, and resistance in China. So we will invite artists, activists, journalists, and researchers coming from different discipline to reflect on the topic. And the splash page is on the website, so you can check it out, and we'll come up with more online and offline activities. And it will also be, the whole conference will be live streamed. And in addition to that, we're gonna have a screening on the 25th of June, again with a very high hopes to be physically in Ekud in Berlin. And it will be our first physical presence in a while. It will be a screening of the newly launched documentary called Enemies of the State by Sonia Knippig, whom has been also one of our Disruptive Fridays guests. And it's speaking about the story of Matt DeHart. And it's very interesting to check the trailers out. It's a very new documentary, and for whoever is in Berlin, will be happy to have it physically, hopefully on the 25th of June. And you can also, since it's the end of the season, you can visit our website, disruptionlab.org, to view all the other 23 episodes of the Disruptive Friday that has took place since April. And at the end, I would love to thank our team, also Elena, Ranav, and Elizabeth from Boiling Head, and also my colleagues from the Disruption Lab. And yeah, this series has been supported by the European Cultural Foundation, Culture of Solidarity Fund, and has been part of the Reimagine Europe, co-funded by the Creative Europe program of the European Union. So thank you very much. It has been such a pleasure to have you, and to end the season with your nice and very promising projects, and looking forward to connect more in Berlin or again online. So thank you very much, and hopefully see you in our events soon in Berlin. Ciao.
Thank you.